At the company dinner, I got up on the table and announced my divorce in front of everyone. The cutlery stopped clinking against the plates, conversation stopped instantly and, for a moment that seemed to last for centuries, the only thing that could be heard was the restrained breathing of dozens of people. Surprised, shocked, confused looks. But I didn't stop there. I didn't just want a cold, dry ad. No, that would be too easy. I wanted her to feel, for him to feel. I wanted every bit of this betrayal to be exposed to the harsh, unforgiving light of truth. I downed my glass of wine before continuing. I felt the alcohol burning my throat, but the real fire was already inside me. I swallowed hard and dropped the bomb. And in case anyone was wondering, my wife's lover is your own boss. The impact was immediate. Someone dropped a fork onto the plate, producing a loud metallic sound that cut through the silence. Murmurs exploded throughout the room, looks went back and forth between me, my wife, or ex-wife, as I now made a point of thinking, and him. The man who had given fiery speeches about loyalty and teamwork was, in the end, a coward. And she, the woman who shared a life with me, stabbed me in the back with the person who signed my salary. Her eyes were wide, her mouth was open, not knowing whether to deny or run. He, sitting at the end of the table, stiffened, as if he were a king watching his castle crumble in front of his subjects. There was nowhere else to run. I had already discovered everything. The last few months have passed like a blur in my mind. The empty excuses, the showers that took too long, the smiles contained while she typed on her cell phone late at night. I didn't want to see it at first, but the truth was there, spread out in signs that I insisted on ignoring. The different perfume on her clothes, the work meetings that multiplied without explanation, the coldness in her eyes when before there was passion. And then, a forgotten message, a clue left behind by a second of carelessness. That was all I needed. I followed the tracks, and what I found was worse than I imagined. The betrayal wasn't just physical. It was emotional. He was an accomplice. It was a perfectly staged theater, and I, the deluded spectator, only noticed when the curtains were falling. I could have remained silent. I could have expected a more discreet moment, a more private environment. But why? To protect them? To preserve an image that was already rotten inside? No. I wanted them to feel the humiliation like I felt. I wanted them to know that I was not a fool. I wanted every person in that room to know who they really were. The boss stood up abruptly, his face turning red as if he was about to explode. "This is absurd," he exclaimed, his voice shaking between anger and panic. She, in turn, was slow to react. The eyes blinked rapidly, the mind clearly trying to find a way out, an excuse, a convenient lie that could be told at that moment. "It's not at all what you're thinking," she said finally, her voice a tone higher than normal, trying to sound convincing. "Isn't it?" I replied, laughing bitterly. "So tell me, how do you explain the hotel reservations? The meetings in the building's garage? The deleted messages? The nights you worked late?" Her silence was the loudest confession I had ever heard. By now, the tension was almost palpable. Co-workers, company directors, even waiters stopped to watch the collapse of an empire of lies. The boss looked around, looking for a way to save his position. But there was no way out. The truth had already been spat into the air, and now everyone was breathing it. But what no one knew, what no one expected, was what would happen after that night. The betrayal was just the beginning. An act that crumbled the fragile structure of the life I thought I had. What came next would be the real twist. Because fate has a cruel way of balancing things. And karma always finds its way. Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not support cheating under no circumstances. The stories you will hear are fictional, but the lesson is real. Betrayal destroys lives, corrodes relationships, and always takes its toll. Now get ready for a story shocking, full of twists, intense emotions and inevitable consequences. Listen carefully, and remember, what you do comes around one day. Michael stared at the large glass window of his office, watching the lights twinkling across the city as his mind wandered between the past and present. He was never a lucky man, but he always made up for it with effort. Everything he had was built with sweat and dedication, from his promising career to the solid relationship that, for years, he believed was proof against any storm. Sarah was the woman with whom he had shared a decade of his life, and, for him, that story had always been written in strong letters, with promises that seemed unbreakable. They met when they were still young, two ambitious hearts who believed that love would be enough to face the world. Michael, a meticulous and rational man, has always been the pillar of stability. Sarah, on the other hand, was impulsive, vibrant, a force of nature who lit up any room she entered. Their lives seemed perfect, at least to outsiders. A well-located apartment, frequent trips, sophisticated dinners and friends who admired them as a model couple. But the truth was, even in the most solid relationships, small cracks could form. And Michael, as attentive as he was, didn't notice when the first ones started to appear. Maybe it was the overwhelming routine, maybe the nights when he came home too late from work, too exhausted for the long conversations or moments of intimacy that once came naturally. Sarah, who always liked to feel desired, began to show a certain distance, a subtle coldness that he noticed, but preferred to believe was just tiredness. It was easier to think that way than to face the possibility that something was wrong. Time passed, and the signs became clearer. Small details that could be ignored individually, but together, they formed a pattern that was difficult to deny. The way Sarah started to dress more neatly even on ordinary days, the distracted smiles while looking at her cell phone, the work meetings that seemed to go on longer and longer. Michael saw it, felt it, but chose to hold on to the idea that it was all part of the natural changes of a marriage. He believed in the stability they had built, believed that nothing could truly shake what they had. Their love had survived so many hardships, so many challenges. Why would it be any different now? The truth is that no one is prepared for the reality they don't want to see. Michael was an observant man, but when it came to Sarah, he preferred to look at what he wanted to believe rather than what was actually happening. Dinners that were once moments of connection became silent meetings, where he spoke more than she did, where eyes did not meet as often as before. Little by little, he began to feel that there was something invisible between them, something he couldn't name, but which grew thicker every day. That's why, when he received the invitation to the company dinner, he saw it as an opportunity. A moment to bring them closer together, to remind Sarah of who they were before any of the wear and tear of time. He planned every detail, made sure everything was perfect. It wasn't just about attending a corporate event, it was about showing her that they were still there, that there was still something to be rescued. That night, as he watched her get ready in the mirror, he tried to ignore the uncomfortable feeling in his chest, the strange heaviness that settled in whenever she looked away. Sarah seemed distant, but Michael decided he wouldn't let his fears consume him. He held her hand firmly as they left the house, as if that gesture was capable of erasing any insecurity that hung over him. The event hall was impeccable, the company's employees circulated around the space amidst glasses of wine and laughter that sounded forced at times. Michael tried to concentrate on the environment, on the conversation with his colleagues, but something inside him wouldn't leave him alone. It was as if his subconscious already knew everything before his eyes even saw any evidence. The night continued its course, with speeches about achieved goals, exaggerated toasts and praise for employee performance. Michael felt Sarah's hand slowly moving away, her eyes wandering to places where he wasn't. A pang of uneasiness ran through his chest, but he forced himself to smile, to ignore it. I didn't want to be that paranoid man, I didn't want to imagine things where maybe there was nothing. But then he saw it. It wasn't a scandalous gesture, nor something that could be clearly pointed out, but it was enough. The look Sarah cast across the table, the subtle, almost imperceptible exchange of knowing smiles. The head of the company, the respected man, the leader who always maintained a firm and unshakable stance, looked at Sarah in a way that no one else there did. And she responded. Michael felt something cold spread inside him. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was a kind of bitter realization, the moment when all the pieces finally fell into place. He didn't know when it happened, he didn't know how deep that silent connection went, but in that instant, everything became clear. The company dinner, which should be a symbol of stability, became the stage for a truth that he could never ignore. The wine in the glass no longer had any taste, the conversations around him sounded distant, as if he were in a movie where everyone spoke a language he didn't understand. His heart was pounding, but his mind was strangely calm. For the first time in a long time, he saw everything clearly. And there was nothing left to be mistaken about. Dinner continued, but for Michael, the night was already over. He knew what he needed to do. And when the right moment came, he wouldn't hesitate. Dinner continued amidst muffled laughter and toasts that sounded increasingly distant to Michael. The other's words seemed blurry, as if he was submerged in a deep pool and only fragments of the outside world reached him. The waiter served well-prepared dishes, the guests exchanged compliments and greetings, but none of that mattered. Sarah's look at her boss continued to burn in his mind, an image that repeated itself like an endless echo. He tried to convince himself that he was exaggerating, that maybe it was just the weight of fatigue distorting his perception, but a growing restlessness settled in his chest, suffocating, oppressive, like a knot he couldn't undo. Sarah was smiling, her face illuminated by the soft lights in the room. To anyone else, she looked like just another elegant, sophisticated woman enjoying the night. But for Michael, every expression, every gesture, was a piece of a puzzle that was beginning to fit together with frightening precision. He remembered the days when she arrived later, the different perfumes she sometimes smelled on her skin, the excuses that seemed trivial, but now gained a weight that he didn't want to admit. For years, he had trusted her without hesitation. But trust, he realized, was a castle built on sand. One breath was enough for it to collapse. The night went on, the speeches were made, the tributes distributed, and Michael remained there, immersed in a whirlwind of thoughts that he still could not organize. At one point, Sarah got up, mumbling something about needing to touch up her makeup, and disappeared among the guests. It was a small detail, but Michael felt a chill run down his spine. Something in his intuition screamed, a dark foreboding that he couldn't ignore. He waited a moment, fighting the doubt that gnawed at him, but then, as if guided by an invisible force, he got up and followed the same path. The hallway leading to the bathrooms was dimly lit, a contrast to the bright glow of the main hall. Michael walked slowly, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor, his mind torn between the irrational hope of being wrong and the overwhelming fear of being right. The door to the women's bathroom was ajar, but it was the muffled sound coming from a door next door that made her heart race. A low, whispered laugh. A quickened breath. He stopped there, feeling his stomach drop. For a moment, he almost backed away. Part of him wanted to walk away, pretend he hadn't heard anything, that it was all just a figment of a fevered imagination. But then, an even clearer sound pierced his hesitation. Her voice. Michael didn't need anything else. His hand clenched into a fist, his jaw muscles tightened. Anger and pain mixed into a bitter poison that coursed through his veins. He pushed open the door without hesitation, and the scene he encountered made his entire world shudder. There, in the forbidden silence of that private room, were Sarah and the boss. The bodies too close, the expressions revealing much more than any words could explain. The air became heavy, filled with a suffocating silence. Sarah instinctively pulled away, her eyes wide in shock, as if she had been caught in an act she never expected to be discovered. The boss, in turn, did not show any immediate reaction. He just straightened his posture, his face impassive, but his eyes betrayed something between surprise and discomfort. Michael felt a metallic taste in his mouth, a reflection of the adrenaline that was now taking over his body. His chest rose and fell irregularly, and for a moment he didn't know what to say. The words seemed insignificant compared to what his eyes saw, what his heart felt. Sarah tried to speak first, her voice shaking in a desperate attempt to justify the unjustifiable. But there was no justification. There was no excuse that could erase that scene, that could reverse what had been done. Michael laughed, a dry, humorless sound. The irony of the situation was cruel. He had spent months ignoring the signs, believing it was all just a bad moment, a passing phase. But there was the truth, naked and raw, with no room for denial or illusion. The man he respected professionally, the leader who had so often spoken about ethics and values, was the same one who was there, betraying not only his trust as a husband, but also the loyalty of an employee. And Sarah, the woman he had loved, the person he had shared a life with, was complicit in this silent betrayal. The boss, perhaps feeling like he needed to take some control of the situation, finally spoke. He tried to minimize what happened, to say that it wasn't what it seemed, that things needed to be explained calmly. But Michael didn't want to hear it. He didn't need to hear it. Everything that mattered was already clear. Sarah, in turn, remained silent, her eyes still locked on his, as if trying to decipher what the next step would be. Michael took a step back, as if being close to those two was something repulsive. His breathing was heavy, his heart was hammering against his chest. He could feel the anger boiling in his gut, but at the same time, there was a strange kind of clarity settling inside him. The kind of clarity that comes when there are no more doubts, when everything finally reveals itself for what it really is. He didn't scream, he didn't make a fuss. He just looked at Sarah one last time, allowing himself to record that image, that betrayal exposed before his eyes. And then, without another word, he turned and left. The company dinner was still going on, the guests continued their carefree conversations, unaware that, at that moment, someone's life was falling apart. Michael walked back into the room, but he no longer belonged there. The weight of the truth crushed him, but at the same time, something inside him began to grow stronger. Because even though the betrayal was an open wound, he knew the worst was yet to come. He knew this was just the beginning. The silence in the car was oppressive. Michael drove through the city streets without really seeing where he was going, his gaze fixed on the road, but his mind distant, immersed in a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions. The company dinner had ended hours ago, but the feeling that everything around them was still moving in slow motion remained. Every detail of that night replayed in his head like a torturous movie, the looks exchanged between Sarah and the boss, the muffled laughter in the hallway, the scene that burned in his memory. The betrayal was there, wide open, and nothing he did could change that. But there was something more, something he felt under his skin, like a truth hidden in the shadow of everything he had already discovered. Sarah was sitting in the passenger seat, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on the window, avoiding meeting him. Her silence wasn't just guilt. There was something beyond, something she was trying to hide, something that made her seem even more restless than she should have been. Michael realized this the moment they left the event, when she tried to speak and then gave up, when her fingers trembled slightly against the fabric of her dress. He knew that, despite everything that had been revealed that night, there was still one last piece of the puzzle left. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, feeling his knuckles turn white. The anger inside him still boiled, but it was different now. It wasn't just about the betrayal. It was about everything that came after. About what was still hidden. Without looking away from the road, his voice was low, controlled, but sharp as a blade. He didn't want explosions, he didn't want screams. I wanted the truth. How long? Sarah blinked a few times, as if she wasn't sure what he was asking, but her hesitation in answering was enough to confirm what he already knew. Michael. He laughed, a short, humorless sound, before turning his face to finally face her. Just answer me. How long has this been going on? She swallowed hard, looking away, and then murmured something so low he almost didn't hear it. 6 months. Michael's blood ran cold. 6 months. Half a year of lies, of fake smiles, of empty touches. 6 months in which he slept next to a woman who was no longer his, while she shared her intimacy with another man. He felt a bitter taste in his mouth, but he didn't allow himself to show weakness. Not now. And when were you going to tell me? When was it convenient? When there was no longer any way to hide? Sarah ran her hands over her face, her breathing ragged, and shook her head. I don't know. I never planned for this to happen, Michael. It was never meant to be like this. He clenched his teeth. As if things just happened, as if betrayal was an inevitable accident, as if at some point she hadn't had the choice to stop. And now? What do you want me to do with this? What do you accept? Let me pretend I didn't see anything. Sarah didn't respond, just continued looking outside, as if finding the right words was impossible. Michael took a deep breath and accelerated a little more, feeling his fury growing, but knowing that exploding wouldn't do any good. He needed more. I needed to get to the bottom of everything. The car turned the corner, and the familiarity of the street hit him like a punch in the gut. He had driven to his boss's house without realizing it. Headlights illuminated the building's facade, and Michael let out a bitter laugh. Interesting. Tell me, is this where you spent most of your nights when you said you were working late? Sarah shrank into the seat, finally turning to face him. Can we please go home and talk? It doesn't have to be like this. But Michael didn't want to go home. Not yet. He was tired of empty conversations, of shallow explanations. He wanted to see where this went. The front door of the building opened, and the boss appeared at the entrance, his face carrying an expression of alarm as he saw the car parked there. He knew. I knew Michael wasn't there by coincidence. Michael got out of the car before Sarah could catch him. He walked up to the man he once respected, who he once considered a leader, and stopped in front of him, his gaze fixed, without blinking. Now that we know what happened, I want to know the rest. What else do you have to tell me? The boss looked at Sarah, then back at Michael, and ran a hand through his hair, visibly uncomfortable. Michael. I'm sorry. That's not what I asked. The man took a deep breath, and Michael knew, in that instant, that he hadn't just made a mistake. He had something to hide. Something much worse than just betrayal. Sarah held her breath, and it was there, in that moment of hesitation, that everything fell into place. The answer was in silence. In the fear written on both of their faces. Michael took a step back, feeling his chest tighten. My God. Sarah stepped forward, her eyes pleading. Michael, please. He closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of that revelation crushing him inside. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. You made me work, respect, obey this man, while you slept with him behind my back. You made me sit in meetings with him while you two laughed at me while I thought I was living a stable life. But you know what's worse? It's not just betrayal. It's the fact that you didn't have the courage to tell me. Not now. Not even after being caught. The boss opened his mouth to say something, but Michael no longer wanted to hear it. He looked at Sarah, and this time there was only coldness in his gaze. I hope it was worth it. He turned around, walked to his car and slammed the door behind him. Sarah didn't follow him. She knew there was nothing more that could be said. Michael started the engine, his heart heavy, his chest tight, but one thing was certain. That night had changed everything. And he wouldn't be the same after that. Michael drove aimlessly, the lump in his throat tightening with every kilometer he traveled. The city passed him in bright blurs, but nothing caught his attention. The car's engine hummed low, accompanying the sound of his rapid breathing. With each blink, flashes of the previous night came to light, like scenes from a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. The revelation had been brutal, but now, in the silence of the early morning, a wave of emotional exhaustion hit him hard. The betrayal was already a crushing blow, but what was eating him up inside was the fact that Sarah and the boss had kept quiet, trying to hide everything as much as they could. The whole time, he had been living like a puppet without realizing it, manipulating himself into believing his marriage was solid while it was being destroyed inside. The phone vibrated on the console beside him, and he glanced quickly at the screen. Sarah's name flashed on the display, insistent, but he ignored it. She no longer had anything to say that could change anything. A few minutes later, another call, this time from the boss. Michael felt his stomach drop. He didn't know what was worse, the man's nerve in trying to talk to him or the simple fact that he still thought there was something to be said. He stopped the car in an empty parking lot, turning off the engine and resting his head on the steering wheel for a few seconds. His chest rose and fell irregularly, his mind buzzing, trying to find some thread of rationality in the midst of the storm that was forming inside him. He stayed like that for a while until he realized he needed something more. He couldn't just drown in the pain of betrayal, he couldn't let it consume him without an answer. He picked up the phone and this time he called back. Sarah answered on the first ring, her voice filled with despair. "Michael, please listen to me." He kept his voice steady, not allowing any emotion to show. "You have 10 minutes to meet me at our house. Only 10. If it doesn't show up, don't look for me anymore." She hesitated, perhaps surprised by the coldness of his words, but responded quickly. "I go." Michael hung up before she could say anything else. He took a deep breath, started the car and went straight to the apartment where they had lived for so many years. Every corner of that place held memories, now stained by betrayal. When he entered, the familiar smell of the house enveloped him, but it no longer brought him comfort. He was waiting for Sarah when he heard the sound of the key turning in the door. She rushed in, her eyes red, her hair slightly disheveled, as if she had been crying the whole way. He closed the door behind him slowly, hesitantly, as if he knew that any sudden movement could make everything explode once and for all. Michael crossed his arms, leaning against the sofa, and waited. "I didn't intend to make anything easier for her. Say what you have to say." Sarah bit her lower lip nervously and took a step forward. "I didn't want it to be like this. I swear, Michael." He laughed, humorlessly, and ran a hand over his face. "That has already become clear. But now I want to know the rest. I want to know what else you were hiding." She blinked quickly, looking away, but didn't respond. "Don't lie to me again, Sarah. I saw the way you looked at him after I confronted you guys. I saw there was something else." Her shoulders slumped in defeat. "You are right. There's something more." Michael felt the tension in his body intensify. "Speak at once." Sarah took a deep breath before releasing the words that would change everything. "He used you, Michael. It wasn't just one case. He's been manipulating you this whole time, and I let it happen." Michael frowned, trying to understand. "Like this?" She hesitated for a second before continuing. "He knew I was unhappy, he knew our marriage had problems. And he looked for me. He made me believe that he understood me, that he wanted to be with me. But it wasn't just that. He wanted something bigger." Michael clenched his fists. What did he want? She ran her hands through her hair, her eyes full of regret. "He wanted to destroy you." Michael was silent for a moment, taking this in. "Destroy me how?" Sarah swallowed hard. "He knew you were one of the highest-rated employees, he knew that if he wanted to get rid of you, he needed something big. So he used me. He knew that if I got involved with him, sooner or later you would find out. He wanted you to react in a way that made you lose everything." Michael felt his stomach turn. "Are you telling me he planned all this?" She nodded, her eyes teary. "He made me believe it was about the two of us, but in the end, he just wanted to destroy his reputation. He knew that when you found out, you wouldn't be able to hold back your anger. He wanted you to lose control, do something that would compromise you in front of the company." Michael felt as if the ground had been ripped out from under his feet. Everything made sense now. The look in his eyes that night, the way he didn't try to deny it or hide it, like he wanted it to explode right then and there. It was a trap. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to contain the fury rising within him. You knew that and still continued? Sarah started to cry. I was blind, Michael. At first, I thought he really cared, but then I realized that I was also just a means to an end. But I'm not innocent. I betrayed you, I lied. I only realized too late that I too had been deceived. Michael felt a mixture of disgust and disgust well up inside him. You handed me over to a man who wanted to destroy me. She sobbed, covering her face with her hands. I know. He took a step back, as if he wanted to get as far away from her as possible. Get out of here, Sarah. She raised her face, pleadingly. Please let me fix this. Michael shook his head slowly. Nothing you say or do can change what happened. You destroyed everything. She hesitated, as if still waiting for a forgiveness that would never come. But then, seeing that there was nothing more to be said, she picked up her bag and walked slowly to the door. Before leaving, he looked back one last time. I really loved you, Michael. He didn't respond. He just stood there, watching her disappear on the other side of the door. And in that instant, he knew that what had started as a simple company dinner had turned into the biggest disaster of his life. But something inside him lit up. The boss had played with him. But the game was not over yet. Michael stood in front of the closed door, his mind spinning in a whirlwind of emotions that he could no longer control. The apartment seemed bigger now, empty, cold, a distant echo of what had once been home. Every piece of furniture, every detail around it carried memories that previously brought him comfort, but now only served to remind him of the farce in which he had lived. The silence in the house was as heavy as ever, but inside, the noise was deafening. Sarah's betrayal was already a brutal blow, but the revelation that it was all just a well-laid plan to destroy him was something he could never have predicted. The boss didn't just want to take his wife, he wanted to take everything. He walked to the kitchen, opened the refrigerator without purpose, just to have something to do with his hands, but closed it soon after. He took a glass, filled it with water and drank it in a single gulp, trying to swallow the suffocating feeling in his chest. But there was nothing that could alleviate what he felt. His world had been shattered in a way that was beyond pain. Now it was about dignity. About what he would do with all that. He couldn't just accept it and move on as if nothing had happened. His phone vibrated on the counter and, reflexively, he glanced at the screen. Another message from the boss. He couldn't decide what was more revolting, the fact that the man was still trying to talk to him or the arrogance of thinking he could convince him to leave everything behind. He opened the message without the slightest intention of responding, but what he read made his anger grow even more. Be rational. What happened between Sarah and I doesn't need to interfere with your future. We can talk like adults and work it out. Don't ruin your career over something that has already happened. The past can't be changed, but the future can still be shaped. Michael clutched the cell phone between his fingers, feeling his blood boil. Was that it? An invitation to simply forget? To pretend nothing happened? He knew what that meant. The boss was not worried about him, but about his own position. He knew that if Michael blew up and went ahead with everything, the company's reputation would take a huge hit. The man was trying to buy her silence with empty promises of job security. Michael threw the phone on the table and ran his hands through his hair. He was being placed before a cruel dilemma. If he reacted, he could end up throwing his own career into the fire along with the bastard who plotted against him. But if he remained silent, he would be swallowing all the humiliation without doing anything. He was never a man to act on impulse, but now, standing there in the middle of that room where his life had been destroyed, he knew he had no choice but to fight back. He picked up his cell phone again and typed a short, direct response, with no room for interpretation. See you tomorrow at the office. The message was sent and Michael felt a strange relief. What would happen from now on wouldn't be pretty, but he couldn't care about that anymore. He had lost everything that mattered, and now the only thing he had left was his dignity. The next morning, he dressed with the same precision as always. He looked in the mirror before leaving, his eyes tired, the deep circles under his eyes betraying the sleepless night, but there was something new there. A cold determination, something he hadn't felt in a long time. He arrived at the company without looking away, without letting anyone notice the war he was waging inside. The hallways were busy, employees rushing past, greeting him unaware of the storm that was about to brew. He went straight to the meeting room, where he knew his boss was already waiting for him. The man was sitting at the table, his posture relaxed, as if everything was under control. But Michael noticed the subtle detail, the fingers tapping against the wood, a nervous tick that betrayed that, deep down, he knew he was stepping into a minefield. Michael sat without saying anything. The boss was the first to speak. "Well, I'm glad you came. I think we can put everything into perspective and find a solution that is best for both of us." Michael crossed his arms, watching him carefully. "Do you really believe you have control over this situation?" The boss smiled, a fake, rehearsed smile. "Control is a matter of perspective. We don't need to turn this into something bigger than it already is." Michael let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. "You destroyed my marriage, used me as a pawn in your game, and now you want me to act like I was just a temporary inconvenience." The boss's smile faded a little, but he maintained his composure. "That's business, Michael. They are not always fair. But that doesn't mean you should destroy your own career over something you've already done." Michael leaned forward slightly. "Are you trying to tell me that I should just suck it up and carry on as if nothing had happened?" The boss sighed, adjusting his tie. "I'm saying there are smarter ways of dealing with things. You are a brilliant professional. Don't let clouded emotions cloud your judgment." Michael was silent for a moment, watching him. And then he smiled, a cold smile, sharp as a blade. "Do you know what the problem is, sir? You think everyone is like you. That everything can be bought, that every dignity has a price. But you were wrong about me." The boss raised an eyebrow, as if curious to see where this was going. Michael stood up, pulling an envelope from his pocket and throwing it on the table. "Within that is your downfall." The boss looked at the envelope warily, then at Michael. "What is that?" "A copy of each email, each record, each proof of its manipulation. You didn't destroy me, you destroyed yourself." The boss's face paled slightly, but he kept his expression controlled. "You can't do that." Michael smiled again. "I already did." He turned and left the room without looking back. As he walked down the hallway, he felt the weight on his shoulders lift a little. The pain was still there, the betrayal still burned, but there was something new. Something he hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. And for the first time in a long time, he knew he was finally ready to move on. Michael left the company building without looking back, feeling the cold morning wind blow against his face. Every step he took felt firmer, more certain. For months, he felt like a prisoner of a reality he didn't know was a lie. But now, as he walked through those doors, as he exposed the truth to the man who had tried to ruin him, he knew something had changed forever. The weight of betrayal was still there, but now it was mixed with a new and unexpected feeling, liberation. He walked across the parking lot to his car, opened the door and got into the driver's seat, but didn't start the engine. He just stood there, his fingers resting on the steering wheel, his gaze lost on the landscape in front of him. What would come now? The boss certainly wouldn't let it go, but Michael no longer cared. For the first time, he was not afraid of the consequences. He had played the last piece on the board and now he had to wait and see what would happen. His cell phone vibrated in his pocket, pulling him out of his thoughts. He picked up the device and saw Sarah's name on the screen. He ignored the call, but the phone vibrated again seconds later. Sighing, he answered. "What do you want now?" Her voice came low, hesitant. We need to talk. Michael let out a dry laugh, running a hand over his face. I don't know what else there is to say. I was fired. He remained silent for a moment, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and indifference. It was no surprise. The boss was trying to clean up the mess, save his own skin as best he could. And Sarah, who had previously thought herself untouchable, was now paying part of the price. And what do you want me to do with this information? She hesitated, and then her voice was filled with anguish. I just wanted you to know. Michael took a deep breath, feeling tired. I already know everything I need to know. He hung up before she could respond. He put his cell phone in his pocket, closed his eyes for a moment and finally started the car. I wouldn't go home. Not now. Not when that apartment carried so many shadows of a past he wanted to forget. I needed a place where I could breathe, where I could see beyond the pain. He drove without a specific destination until, without realizing it, he found himself at the edge of the lake where he used to go when he needed to think. The same place where, years ago, he and Sarah spent entire afternoons laughing, dreaming, believing they had a promising future ahead of them. But now, the landscape seemed different, less welcoming. Maybe because reality had changed, or maybe because he had changed. He got out of the car, walked to the water's edge and stood there, looking at his own reflection distorted by the slight ripple. He tried to remember the last time he felt truly happy, without the chains of distrust or pain. He tried to imagine what he would do now, how he would rebuild his life after what happened. The sound of soft footsteps on the grass made him turn his head. A woman approached slowly, looking unsure if she should approach. Her hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders and her eyes had a sparkle that mixed curiosity and kindness. Sorry to bother you, she said, smiling slightly. I couldn't help but notice that you seemed to be lost in thought. Michael looked at her for a moment, surprised by the unexpected approach. I think I was, yes. She cocked her head to the side, studying him. Do you want to talk about this? Michael almost laughed. He didn't know her, had never seen her before, and yet, there was something comforting in the ease with which she addressed him. I don't think it's worth boring a stranger with my problems. She smiled, crossing her arms. Who said I'm a stranger? We never know who could end up becoming someone important in our lives. Michael was silent for a moment, absorbing those words. For the first time in a long time, he felt a different lightness, as if a door had opened inside him. Perhaps not all was lost. Maybe there was something beyond the pain, something beyond the betrayal. He glanced at the lake once more before turning to her, offering a half smile. You may be right. And for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to believe that the future could still bring something unexpectedly good. Time passed strangely for Michael. The following weeks were a mix of chaos and reconstruction. The scandal within the company exploded much bigger than the boss had anticipated. As soon as the evidence of his manipulation was exposed, the board was forced to intervene. The man who was always proud to be at the top, who used his position as a shield, was shamefully removed from office. Michael didn't need to raise his voice, he didn't need to act in the heat of emotion. The truth alone was enough to destroy everything that man had built on lies. The blow was devastating. Not only did he lose his position of power, but he also saw his reputation crumble in a matter of days. With no way out, he tried to hold on to the last crumbs of control, he tried to discredit Michael, he tried to find a way to turn the tide. But the company's board was relentless. His own name became a weight, and the only way out was a definitive departure. The man who orchestrated Michael's destruction ended up a ghost within the very company he once commanded. Michael could have taken pleasure in seeing him fall, could have savored every bit of the ruin of the one who tried to destroy him. But in the end, all he felt was profound relief. It wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. It was about never allowing anyone to play with him like that again. Sarah, in turn, experienced a different kind of fall. Without her job, without the support of her boss who used and discarded her as soon as the situation became untenable, she was left without ground. He tried to contact Michael a few times, but he never answered. The messages I sent went unanswered. She wasn't just dealing with the loss of a marriage. He was dealing with the weight of knowing he threw away years of his life for something that was never real. The man she risked everything for, the one who made her believe she was special, didn't hesitate to leave her behind at the first opportunity. With no job, no reputation, nothing but her own mistakes to bear, Sarah was forced to face the harsh reality of her choices. Michael never looked for her again. He knew that if he saw her, if he heard her voice, the anger would return, the past would come back to haunt him. But he no longer wanted to live trapped by what happened. He had wasted too much time on what he couldn't change. His focus now was on what was to come. The woman he met by the lake that night kept coming into his life in unexpected ways. In the beginning, it was just a casual conversation here and there, no strings-attached meetings, exchanges of words that didn't have the weight of pain. But over time, something began to form. She wasn't a distraction, she wasn't an attempt to fill the void. It was someone who was simply there, without rushing, without demands. Someone who reminded him that the world didn't just have to be a place of betrayal and deceit. Michael didn't jump into a new relationship right away. He allowed himself time. Time to rediscover yourself, to learn to enjoy your own company again, to build something from scratch. But, contrary to what he thought would happen, he felt no fear. For the first time in a long time, he looked to the future without resentment. The boss, now reduced to a name spoken in whispers within the company, tried everything to get back on his feet. But the truth was that no one trusted him anymore. His downfall was public, his credibility annihilated. Without support, without influence, without the power he so cherished, he became irrelevant. Sarah tried to rebuild her life somewhere else, away from the eyes that judged her, away from the shadow of a mistake that would haunt her forever. But no matter where she went, the guilt followed her. What she destroyed could not be repaired. And the only thing left was learning to live with the consequences. Michael, in turn, moved on. Not in a hurry, not with a desire to replace what he lost, but with the certainty that he had won. Not because he destroyed those who betrayed him, but because he refused to be destroyed by them. And in the end, he realized that he didn't need revenge. I just needed peace. Now tell me, what did you think of this story? I want to know your opinion in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Here, we do not support cheating of any kind. What goes around, one day comes around. See you next time.